I lost my best friend at sea, and I think something took him. Losing someone you're close to is always a horrific experience. But when you lose that someone in a sudden and strange way right before your eyes, it hurts so much worse. That someone was my best friend, Harry. We'd known each other for the better part of 6 years. I first met Harry on move-in day at Massachusetts Maritime Academy. He was one of my roommates, and we hit it off pretty much right away. I don't remember how it came up exactly, but it turned out we both had a niche interest in cryptozoology. In what little free time we were given at the academy, we would drive out to the infamous Bridgewater Triangle in search of whatever paranormal activity there might be. Ghosts, pukwudgies, UFOs, you name it. Neither of us truly believed that we'd ever find anything. We mostly just used our little misadventures as an excuse to drink in the woods. The closest we ever came to some kind of supernatural encounter was when we stumbled across a hairless raccoon. It was certainly the strangest thing we ever saw out there. Those 4 years were some of the hardest in my life, and if it weren't for Harry, they very well could have been the last. As cliché as it sounds, he became a brother to me. I'd even go visit his family with him on vacation and holidays. His parents would jokingly refer to me as their long-lost kid. Our graduation was one of the hardest days of my life. I've never been good with goodbyes, even with people I didn't like, but Harry was on a whole other level. I nearly cried in front of his whole family. Thank God I didn't. Harry went on to work for a tanker company based out of Seattle, and I went off to work on tugboats in Alaska. We kept in touch the whole time, but it just wasn't the same as seeing him in person. Our schedules didn't line up well either, so we couldn't ever really see each other. That went on for about 2 years before I expressed interest in going to work on the tanker with him. He seemed pretty excited about the idea and offered to put in a good word for me. He had already worked himself up to the position of third mate and was on pretty good terms with a couple of the captains there, so I figured his word was good and went for it. I ended up getting the job and started pretty quickly after finishing my last hitch with the tugs. I was even lucky enough to get to work my first hitch on the tanker with Harry. It was the first time I got to really spend time with him in 2 years, and it was nice to have a friendly face to help me adjust to life on the tanker. Working on a new ship is always a nerve-wracking experience, especially one as large as the one I was now living on. It was about 680 feet from bow to stern, which is relatively small for a tanker. Life aboard was actually really nice. Since these hitches are pretty long, they make sure there are a lot of accommodations aboard, a dedicated cook, TVs, a gym, and there was even a driving simulator setup. Between Harry and the ship herself, it seemed like this was going to be a great fit for me, and I was excited to start my first voyage aboard. We would be leaving from LA and heading to Japan. The whole trip should take about 20 days, given we avoid any major setbacks. Looking back at it now, it's hard to fathom how differently I would feel on the other side of those 20 days. The first few days went fairly well. Most of life on a ship underway is routine maintenance, cleaning and standing watch. Lookout watches were my favorite, whether it be at the helm itself or just helping to keep an eye out. Not too much goes on in the middle of the Pacific, so a lot of the time I'd be up there with Harry, and we'd just joke around and share stories with the rest of the crew on the bridge. There were a couple of occasions where we had to make passing arrangements with another vessel, or we got reports of free-floating containers in the area, but aside from that, it was pretty uneventful. It wasn't until the 8th day that it would change. I wasn't on the bridge when this happened, but Harry filled me in when he saw me. The incident occurred during the night watch. Lights were spotted on the horizon, which is not an uncommon occurrence at all, as lights are used to identify ships and communicate critical info, like what sides you are seeing, so you can determine what direction the ship is headed. For example, all ships have a green light on their starboard side, red on the port, a white light on the stern and masthead, and then there are yellow lights to indicate if they're towing something. What was uncommon about the lights were their color. Apparently, it was a horizontal line of interchanging green and purple lights. There are no vessels that use purple lights in any scenario. There was some talk of maybe they were actually red and just looked purple at a distance for whatever reason, but even then that pattern of red and green isn't used at all in the maritime world. They disappeared after about 20 minutes and weren't seen again. It really wasn't that significant of an incident at all and was forgotten about almost immediately, but it was the first in a series of strange occurrences. Harry especially didn't think much of it, although he did crack a joke saying it might have been a flock of ropen. If you've never heard of them, ropen are a cryptid from the Southwest Pacific that are basically just glowing pterodactyls. I laughed, but deep down I thought about how cool it would be to see some kind of sea monster while we were out here, like how the sailors of old would talk about seeing mermaids or kraken. It was a childish fantasy, but my fantasy nonetheless. The next day, we would stumble across the next strange occurrence of our journey, and this time I would be the one to witness it. I was out on bow watch, where I would stand at the very front of the ship to help keep a lookout instead of up on the bridge. I spotted something floating in the water about 500 feet off our port side. It looked fairly large, so I called it out to the captain on the radio. I then took a closer look through my binoculars and realized what was in the water. It was a dead whale. There were even a few sharks feasting on it. It didn't look like it had been dead for long. While it's not a typical sight, coming across a dead whale is by no means an unnatural one. I've seen pictures and videos of scenes just like this before, but what I haven't seen before is the types of injuries this dead whale had. There were the easily explainable ones, such as the large chunks of missing flesh from the opportunistic sharks or holes pecked into the surface of the whale from seabirds, but then there were the long, deep gashes in the whale. They were straight, almost parallel lines, and the flesh around the wounds seemed almost charred. I'm by no means an expert on decaying whales, so I very well may have just misunderstood what the process of decay looks like on a whale, but nonetheless something about it just felt off to me. The bridge team seemed to have gotten a kick out of it. The captain even took a picture to send to his wife, who was a middle school science teacher, so she could show her class. The thought of the roping entered my head again. The childish side of me thought maybe, just maybe, this whale was a victim of that flock, and the gashes in its side were from the mighty claws of those bioluminescent pterosaurs. It certainly was the funnest explanation I could think of. Maybe that's what I'll tell my kids someday. If I ever have kids, at least. I radioed up to Harry, joking about the roping, to which I got a quick laugh back and a confused captain asking, "What the hell is a roping?" I embarrassingly explained it in the most simple way I could think of, a glowing pterodactyl. To which the captain only said, "Oh, okay. Sweet." Another 2 days would go by without incident, but the next occurrence would be much more notable. Yet again, I was there for what happened. This time I was up on the bridge at the helm when something strange appeared on our radar. It was showing a large target about 15 miles off of our starboard bow. Based on the size of the blob on the radar, it would have been roughly the same size as us, but it could not be spotted with the bare eye or our ECDIS boat GPS. We were nowhere near any land masses whatsoever, and even if we were, we should have been able to see it. The weather was completely clear and our visibility was well past 15 miles. There was no land and there were no ships. Large targets appearing out of nowhere on radar is actually somewhat normal due to subrefraction and other science nonsense I could not care enough to memorize, but what isn't normal is these ghost targets being given ARPA data. ARPA is an add-in to radar that will automatically track targets in your area and warn you if they become a danger. ARPA will automatically calculate the target speed, course, distance to you, CPA, closest point of approach, and TCPA, time of CPA. Our ARPA was giving us all of this data on the target, meaning that something was actually there and that something was moving. According to the ARPA, it wouldn't be a danger to our course and was in fact moving away from us. This was pretty confusing to everyone on the bridge, including the captain. There was no real explanation for this other than it just being a really weird glitch. However, the captain decided to take extra precaution anyway and ordered the lookouts to keep an eye out for our ghost, if it was in fact real. No one ever caught a glimpse of it. I tried to think of a way I could tie this into my ever-growing rope and lore, but it was just too weird of an incident, and unless you had somewhat of an understanding of how radar works, it's not one you'd find any significance in. Instead, I tried to turn it into its own sea story. I settled on our radar picking up on a ghost ship. I was pretty proud of that one, but I never got around to telling Harry, which was a real shame because I think he would have really liked it, and now I'll never have the chance to tell him. As weird as that whole ghost radar situation was, it would not be the last of the day's weirdness. In the last hour of the day watch, we started to get some very strange communications over the radio. It had been 4 days since we last communicated with another vessel and 3 since we heard any communications over the radio at all. All vessels are supposed to monitor 2 different radio channels at all times. Channel 13 for general communications and Channel 16 for emergency communications, your maydays, sinking ships, fires, etc. These new chatterings were coming over Channel 16. What we heard was almost nonsense. They were complete sentences, but they were without clear context or purpose, and the message was being spoken interchangeably by different voices, switching word from word. The voices of both men and women with various accents would all take turns speaking as if it was a Mad Lib. From what I remember, it went something like this: American male pon, British male this, Scandinavian female vessel, Indian male in need, American female immediate, Eastern European male passing, British male request, Japanese male stay, Middle Eastern male course, French female starboard, Chinese male passing. The voices then cut out to brief static and then silence. The captain was more annoyed than anything. Everyone chalked it up to interference and the message to just be nonsense. But it sat with me, as chaotic and jumbled as the message was. It was clearly trying to communicate something to us. Whoever made that message urgently needed us to stay on course. I'm not sure why they would have chosen to do it like that instead of just communicating normally. The wording of the transmission was also strange. It got the message across, but it was done so choppily, like whoever made it did not have a great grasp of the English language or only had a limited amount of words it could use. The whole situation just did not sit right with me. The only way I can describe it was as uncanny. After our watch ended, I took Harry aside and asked him what he thought of today. He didn't seem to be anywhere near as freaked out as I was, but he did admit that the strange occurrences of today were both firsts for him. He told me not to worry, that weird shit just happens sometimes, especially when you're trapped in a metal box all day surrounded by hundreds of miles of nothingness. He then threw out another quick joke about ghosts and sea monsters. I was still in my head when he said it, so I didn't catch the whole thing, but I laughed anyway because I probably would have thought whatever he actually said was funny. After our little talk, we went down to the galley to get some food before we called it for the night. Even after hanging out with Harry, I was still a bit shaken up. I ended up having some pretty intense nightmares that night. I forgot what they were almost immediately after waking up, but I think it had to do with ghosts being on the ship or something like that. I don't think I was alone in the night I had because the whole ship had a solemn mood the next day. My gut is telling me something happened to the night crew, something strange, but none of them said anything, and the ones I specifically asked said that it was just a quiet night. The weather even reflected the mood. It wasn't bad weather by any means, just overcast with some light rain. It wouldn't take long until the day took a grim turn. After only an hour or two into the watch, we came across another vessel, a small sailboat drifting all by its lonesome. It was spotted by the bow lookout. The mast was cracked in half and fell into the water, taking the sail with it. The deck was an absolute mess with debris and gear scattered everywhere. The hatch to the interior was also left wide open with no one in sight. The captain tried hailing the small vessel on the radio to no avail. We blared our horn to try to get the attention of anyone that might be aboard, but yet again there was no response. The captain called the vessel in to nearby authorities and warned any nearby traffic of the derelict vessel. He then decided to use our rescue boat, a small boat used for man-overboard scenarios, to send a small team of the deck crew to investigate the boat and see if there is anyone in need of immediate medical assistance. It may take hours for a Coast Guard or naval vessel to get to our position, and the captain did not want to risk leaving someone to die. I volunteered to be a part of the boarding party, along with 3 other crew members. We were able to get alongside the sailboat fairly quickly and easily. 3 of us climbed onto the boat and performed a quick investigation. There was no one aboard, but everything on the inside seemed untouched. Food was still on the table. Life jackets were still stored away, and there was a camera sitting next to a laptop on a counter. We were specifically instructed not to touch anything unless there was an injured person aboard, so I didn't investigate further, but there was already a grim fate being painted for whoever was the crew of this vessel. You could be the best swimmer in the world, but you won't survive for long in the water without a life jacket. After making absolutely sure there was no one aboard, we returned to our own vessel and reported to the captain. With the US Navy sending a ship over to investigate and organize a search and rescue operation, and no one in immediate danger, we were free to continue on our way. Not many words were spoken for the rest of the day. The next day was the climax of all this strange phenomenon, and by far the worst day of my life. One of the guys who boarded the sailboat with me ended up getting extremely sick. I am pretty sure it was just nerves, but either way he was puking his guts out and was in no shape to be performing his tasks for the day. We also entered an incredibly thick fog bank, due to the importance of having a bow lookout and the fear that me and the 2 other guys that boarded the sailboat might have also contracted something. Harry volunteered to do bow lookout, even though that was technically below his duties. The captain thought that was for the best and kept us inside. Traveling through fog is always a nerve-wracking experience, especially after the day we had and the possibility of an outbreak aboard the vessel. The bridge was masked in absolute silence. The only thing that could be heard was our fog signal, which blared every minute or so, a loud whistle followed by a distinct gong. The only other thing that could be heard were the periodic interruptions from Harry updating us from the bow. This would go on for 2 hours until Harry came through the radio sounding frantic. He started to hear something close, something loud. I can still hear everything he said perfectly. It's ingrained into my head. Hey, Cap, I hear something. I'm not sure what it is exactly. It doesn't sound like a foghorn or a buoy, but it's definitely not natural and it's close. Real close. I think it's getting closer. It's getting louder at least. It's like this weird whirring sound. I don't know how else to explain it. Oh, and the air is getting warmer. Real warmer. Cap, I don't know what's going on. The captain tried to calm him down. Keep calm, Harry, you're good. We're good as long as it's not a ship, it's okay. Even if it's a buoy, we'll just knock the fucker out of the way, ain't that right, Harry? Hiya, Cap, that's right. I think I see the sun peeking out from the clouds, so that should be a good sign, right? As Harry spoke, we could see the light he was talking about. But it wasn't the sun. It was a large, wide beam of light aimed directly at Harry. It kept growing brighter and brighter and brighter until we could not bear to keep our eyes open anymore. Harry attempted to contact us one more time, but his voice was quickly drowned out by static. Hey, CASKSKSKSKSKKS. The blinding light and deafening static went on for a few more seconds, a gruelingly long few more seconds. Then both the light and static disappeared at once, before my eyes could even adjust back to the dim dark lighting of the bridge. The captain was already blindly reaching out to grab the radio. He desperately tried to hail Harry to see if he was okay, but Harry was not answering. He ordered me to grab my life jacket and get my ass down there to see what was going on. I sprinted as fast as I could, barely even getting my life vest on as I ran a small marathon to the front of the ship. When I reached my destination, my heart was pounding out of my chest from both anxiety and exhaustion. As I tried to catch my breath, I realized Harry was nowhere in sight. I instinctively grabbed my radio and yelled "Man overboard." Almost as soon as I said it, I could feel the massive vessel start to make a drastic change in course. We hailed any and all nearby vessels for assistance. Thanks to the search for whoever owned that sailboat, there were already a decent amount of naval and Coast Guard vessels in the area. But even with all of their resources, we couldn't find a single sign of Harry. We spent 8 hours looking for him. Eventually, the captain had to make the call no one wanted to make. We had to start making way to Japan. The longer we spent searching, the more fuel we'd burn, and if we burned enough fuel, we'd never make it to Japan. Our only solace was that the Coast Guard would keep searching, and hopefully we'd get some good news by the time we finished our journey. Unfortunately, that good news never came. Eventually, the Coast Guard too had to call off their search. The aftermath was brutal. His family was torn apart. I was torn apart. His family is still holding out hope that he'll be found. They refuse to hold a funeral until they know for sure. I was not so hopeful, at least not at first. Even in the modern day, dying at sea is all too common. Once someone is in the water, it is a Herculean task to find them, especially with the restricted visibility that the fog had cursed us with. But it was a long way back from Japan, and I had a lot of time to think. We didn't have a single strange occurrence during the entire voyage back, which only made what we encountered on the way to Japan all the more peculiar. It was all just too strange, too much of a coincidence: the lights, the whale, the radar, the radio, the abandoned ship, and Harry. It all has to be connected. Harry didn't fall overboard. Something took him, but I don't know what. Ropins? Ghost? I just know that my friend didn't fall overboard. He's still out there somewhere. Somehow.
Thanks for listening to today's story. Let us know what you think. If you want to hear more scary stories, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode when we upload it. We'll always be here and welcome you.